And Hannah Leibreich here with 452 material. So this week we're looking at the Moynihan report and the way in which Black family dynamics are constructed within our U.S. context. So the first thing I'll say is that the Moynihan report was allegedly completed with the best of intentions. So just an exploratory study to look at sort of the root of problems in low income, predominantly Black areas. However, that information was misinterpreted by politicians, by academics, by all sorts of people to essentially criminalize and demonize Black family structures, but especially family structures where you have a Black woman who is the head of household. So, as you think about this report, we have a couple of readings. So, one reading for this week is, sorry, uh, well, both readings, I guess I should start by saying, for this week, are newspaper articles. So one's from the Atlantic and it's about mass incarceration in the report. And the other one is also about mass incarceration, but looking sort of at the historical context 40 years later. And so at first you might think, oh, like what does mass incarceration have to do with Black family structure or the Moynihan report? But the connection is the fact that if we look at who in our country is disproportionately incarcerated, it's Black men. So what I mean by that is if you look at the proportion of Black men in our population, like our overall population, and then you look at the proportion of Black men who are incarcerated, that number is much, much higher than the number in our overall population. So that tells us in our society, Black men are more likely to be incarcerated than any other demographic. And so that in turn means that Black women are often the head of household, right? Because that's who is left. And increasingly, we're seeing Black women also being incarcerated at disproportional rates compared to their white counterparts. But a lot of the focus in academic spaces and organizing and advocacy spaces is on the Black male experience. And so I encourage you to think about what all that means. You might consider watching some documentaries about mass incarceration, such as the documentary 13, which is available for streaming on Netflix. You can also watch it for free on YouTube if you don't have a Netflix subscription. But I also know that a lot of instructors will have their students watch this film, so you may have already seen it. And just think about the prison industrial complex and what it means when an entire group of people are being disproportionately incarcerated. What does that mean for family structures? Like those parents, those children, those siblings, those aunts, those uncles, they cannot participate in the everyday lives of family structures when they're incarcerated for long periods of time, right? And so very often the focus when we think about mass incarceration in the United States is on the mainland, right? And the Black experience. But what's interesting about Hawaii is that we see similar disproportional rates of incarceration among Pacific Islander and Native Hawaiian populations. So Pacific Islanders and Native Hawaiian men and women, but especially men, if you look at the proportion they make up of our overall population, and then you look at the rates of incarceration, there are way more folks from those communities being incarcerated compared to their makeup in our general population. So that tells us we have a problem, right? We have a problem with mass incarceration, and this trickles down and means that we have a problem when it comes to when it comes to family structures. And the last thing I'll say, so again, very often the focus is on the male experience when it comes to incarceration, because currently, although the rates of women and girls being incarcerated is skyrocketing in the maybe past decade or so, men and boys are still more likely to be incarcerated than their female counterparts. However, one of the interesting things about girls and women being incarcerated is the impact that this has on family structure. So in our Western society, girls and women are the folks who are expected to be primary caregivers of children, right? And, we think about maternal instincts and how that's normalized in our society. And so when you take girls and women and you place them in prisons, and then they're removed and they're isolated from their family and from their children, there's a bunch of scholarship from criminologists looking at what impact being incarcerated so far away from your children has on girls and women, as well as what impact that has on the children themselves. And we know that when a child has one or both parents incarcerated at any point during their upbringing, that they're significantly more likely to be incarcerated themselves. And so it's this vicious cycle where folks who are living in poverty, they're more likely to be incarcerated. Certain minority groups, such as Black folks or Pacific Islanders and Native Hawaiians here in Hawaii, are more likely to be incarcerated. And then when they have children, as they have children, because their children are being raised while they're incarcerated, at least partially, those children are then more likely to be incarcerated. So I encourage you to provide a silver lining and think about ways in which we can sort of stop this cycle and stop this connection between the prison industrial complex and family structures, which also requires ending the prison industrial complex, which means ending mass incarceration. So not having nearly as many folks incarcerated here in Hawaii or on the mainland. And so, like, what do? We have crime, right? People commit crimes. So how do we stop incarceration? And so there are alternative forms of punishment. So we can do restorative justice programming. We can have folks sit down with the person who committed a crime against them if they want, and have them do restorative justice work. So that's an alternative, right? We can also do other forms of programming. So here in Hawaii, we have a homeless crisis, right? Like Governor David Ige has publicly announced that. And so we criminalize folks for being homeless. People, they break a sit-lie ban, right? And then they get arrested because they broke that law that's been enacted. And so now they're in jail and they don't have money to post bail. So they're just sitting in jail even before they've been found guilty of breaking a law. And so we criminalize being poor here, among other things, right? So there are other ways in which we could handle those types of crime. We could provide housing for folks, right? We could provide a living wage for folks. There's all different ways we can combat this issue of mass incarceration, which in turn would mean that family structures were held more intact. Anyway, that's my connection between family structures, the Moynihan Report, and mass incarceration. If you have any questions, as always, please feel free to email me at hannahli@hawaii.edu. Bye, guys.